Have you ever stood in front of your American neighbors, smiling politely, while understanding almost nothing they were saying? That was me on my first week in the United States. My English from textbooks suddenly felt useless. But something surprising happened. A simple hello from next door slowly turned into real conversations, unexpected friendship, and even love. And along the way, I discovered a powerful secret. The fastest way to learn English is hidden inside everyday life.
Bold start in a quiet neighborhood. What if the biggest reason people fail to improve their English is not grammar, not vocabulary, but fear of real conversations? Many learners spend years studying English. They memorize words, complete exercises, watch lessons, and pass tests. On paper, everything looks impressive. But the moment they face a real conversation with a native speaker, something strange happens. The brain freezes. The sentence you practiced yesterday disappears. The simple words you know suddenly feel difficult. And inside your head, one quiet thought appears. Maybe my English is not good enough. That exact moment changed my life when I first arrived in the United States. I still remember the neighborhood where I stayed during my first months in America. It was quiet, peaceful, and looked like something from a movie. Small houses lined the street, each with a green lawn in front. In the morning, the sunlight felt gentle, and sometimes you could hear birds singing between the trees. Everything looked calm. But inside my mind, nothing felt calm. Because living in America meant something new, English was everywhere. In the grocery store. On the street. At the bank. And most unexpectedly, right next door. My American neighbors. Before coming to the US, I believed my English was good enough. I had studied grammar for years. I knew hundreds of words. I could read articles and understand most of them. But real-life English in America is very different from classroom English. Real conversations move fast. People shorten words. They speak naturally, casually, sometimes even lazily. And the first time I experienced this was on a quiet morning beside my mailbox. It was only my second day in the neighborhood. I walked outside to check the mail. The air felt slightly cool even though the sun was bright. American weather can be surprising like that. As I reached the mailbox, I noticed someone across the small street. My neighbor. He was watering his lawn, moving slowly with a garden hose, enjoying the morning. Then he looked at me and smiled. Morning. How's it going? Now something interesting happened inside my brain. I understood each word individually. Morning. How? Going. But together, the meaning suddenly felt confusing. Was he asking about my day? Was it just a greeting? Did he expect a real answer? For 2 seconds, my mind searched desperately through every English lesson I had ever studied. But textbooks never prepared me for this simple moment. So I smiled politely and answered with the safest sentence I knew. Good. Thank you. He nodded kindly and said something else. Nice. Welcome to the neighborhood. The entire interaction lasted maybe 5 seconds. But inside my mind, it felt like a small lesson about real English. Because something became very clear that day. Learning English from books gives knowledge. Learning English from life gives confidence. And confidence is what truly helps language grow. Later that morning, I sat at my small kitchen table and thought about what happened. Why was such a simple conversation difficult? The answer is something many language learners discover only after living in an English-speaking country. Most learners study perfect English, but Americans often speak comfortable English. Instead of saying, "How are you today?" people say, "How's it going?" Instead of, "Hello, it is nice to meet you." They say, "Hey, nice to meet ya." Words become shorter. Sounds blend together. Sentences become relaxed. This is not incorrect English. It is living English. And understanding this difference became the first important step in my journey. So I decided to change my learning strategy. Instead of only studying alone inside the house, I started paying attention to everyday conversations around me. Each morning I walked outside around the same time. Sometimes neighbors were walking their dogs. Sometimes they checked their mailboxes. Sometimes they talked briefly before leaving for work. At first, I did not say much. I simply listened. Listening is one of the fastest ways the brain learns a language. Neuroscience research shows that repeated exposure to natural sounds helps the brain recognize patterns more easily. Children learn language this way. They listen long before they speak. So I listened carefully to the rhythm of American conversations. Short sentences. Friendly tone. Simple words. And slowly, something interesting started happening. My fear became smaller. Because the more you hear real English, the more normal it feels. A few days later, I saw the same neighbor again near the mailbox. This time I decided to try something slightly different. He smiled again and said, "Hey there." Instead of only saying, "Good," I added one new sentence. "Hi. I just moved here last week." My voice was slow. My accent was probably strong. But the sentence came out. And something surprising happened. His face became brighter. "Oh really? Welcome. Where are you from?" The conversation lasted less than 1 minute. But for me, it felt like a big step forward. Because that small moment proved something powerful. Real progress in English does not happen through perfect sentences. It happens through real interactions. Even short ones. Even imperfect ones. That mailbox conversation, simple as it was, became the first door in a much bigger story. A story about neighbors, culture, friendship, and eventually something even deeper. But most importantly, it became the moment I truly began learning real English in America. Sometimes the fastest way to improve a language is not studying harder. It is simply stepping outside your door and saying hello.
The power of a simple hello. One small word can quietly change your entire English journey. Hello. It sounds almost too simple to matter. Yet many English learners avoid saying it. Not because they don't know the word, but because they fear what might come after it. A question. A conversation. A moment where English suddenly becomes real instead of theoretical. But something interesting happens in the United States. Many real conversations begin with nothing more than a short greeting. No long sentences. No complex grammar. Just a small doorway into human connection. And that doorway often starts with neighbors. A few days after my first awkward mailbox conversation, I began noticing a daily pattern in the neighborhood. Early mornings were quiet. Around 8 o'clock, people slowly appeared outside their homes. One neighbor walked his golden dog every morning. Another neighbor watered plants in front of the house. Someone else usually stepped outside to grab the newspaper or check the mailbox. And almost every time two neighbors crossed paths, the same thing happened. They greeted each other. Morning. Hey there. How's it going? Beautiful day today. The conversations were usually short. Sometimes only 5 seconds. Sometimes 20 seconds. But something about these tiny interactions fascinated me. They were natural, relaxed, friendly. More importantly, they were real English practice happening everywhere. That observation gave me a small idea. If Americans practice English every day through small greetings, maybe I should do the same. So I created a personal rule. A very simple rule. Every time I saw a neighbor, I would say hello first. No long conversations required. No pressure. Just a greeting. The first few days felt uncomfortable. My brain still hesitated before speaking. My mouth sometimes moved slower than my thoughts. But something interesting began happening. People responded warmly. One morning, the neighbor with the golden dog walked past my driveway. I gathered my courage and said, "Good morning." He smiled immediately. "Morning. Beautiful day, right?" For a moment I paused. My brain translated his sentence. Then I answered slowly, "Yes, very beautiful." He nodded and continued walking. That was it. 10 seconds. But those 10 seconds were powerful. Because each small greeting trained my brain to use English in real time. Language learning research shows that short, repeated interactions help build speaking confidence faster than long, rare conversations. The brain becomes familiar with patterns, sounds, and reactions. And greetings are perfect for that. They are simple, predictable, friendly. After about a week, I noticed something surprising. My neighbors were greeting me first. "Hey. Morning. How are you doing?" The neighborhood started feeling less like a foreign place and more like a community. And my English slowly began to feel more natural. Another interesting discovery came from listening carefully to how Americans greet each other. In textbooks, greetings often look formal. "Hello, how are you today?" But in everyday American English, greetings are usually shorter. "How's it going?" "What's up?" "Hey, how are ya?" At first, these phrases confused me. For example, when someone said, "What's up?" I thought they were asking what I was doing at that exact moment. But most of the time, it is simply a casual greeting. The expected answer can be very short. "Not much." "Doing good." "Pretty good." Understanding this helped me relax during conversations. I realized that not every question requires a long answer. Sometimes people are simply being friendly. Another helpful strategy one learned was mirroring. Mirroring means repeating a similar style of speech you hear from others. If someone says, "Morning," you can answer, "Morning." If someone says, "How's it going?" you can answer, "Good. How about you?" This technique reduces pressure because you don't need to invent complex sentences. You simply follow the natural rhythm of the conversation. Many communication experts say mirroring helps build social connection quickly. It also helps language learners adapt to natural speaking patterns. One afternoon, while walking back from a small grocery store nearby, I saw the same lawn-watering neighbor again. This time he was trimming some plants near the front yard. He noticed me and waved. "Hey, settling in okay?" Now this sentence would have confused me during my first day. But by then, I had heard similar phrases several times. So I understood the meaning. He was asking if I was getting comfortable in the neighborhood. I answered carefully but confidently, "Yes. It's very nice here. Everyone is very friendly." He smiled again. "Glad to hear that." Then he asked something unexpected. "How long have you been in the US?" The conversation lasted maybe 2 minutes. Still short. Still simple. But this time something felt different. I was no longer just reacting to English. I was participating. And that is a crucial step in language learning. Many people wait until their English feels perfect before speaking. But real progress often happens in the opposite order. You speak first. Then improvement follows. Those short greetings with neighbors became my daily speaking practice. No classroom. No pressure. No formal lessons. Just real life. And slowly, those small hellos were opening the door to something much bigger. Because one of those neighbors would soon become far more important in my story than I ever expected. A simple greeting was about to turn into something deeper. Something that would change not only my English, but also my life in America. And it all began with a single word. Hello.
Small talk that changed my English. A strange truth about life in the United States appears after you live here for a while. Some of the most useful English conversations are also the shortest ones. Not long speeches. Not academic discussions. Just small talk. Those tiny conversations that last 30 seconds, sometimes even less. At first, many English learners ignore small talk. It feels unimportant. Too simple. Too casual. But in America, small talk is more than polite conversation. It is the social engine of everyday life. It helps strangers become neighbors. It helps neighbors become friends. And for someone learning English, it becomes a daily training ground. After my first weeks in the neighborhood, I began noticing that small talk happened everywhere. At the mailbox. Near the driveway. In front of the house while someone watered plants. Even while walking to the car. People rarely stopped for long conversations. But they often exchanged a few quick sentences. At first, I mostly listened. Listening carefully became my secret classroom. One morning, I heard two neighbors talking across the street. Cold today, huh? Yeah, but tomorrow should be warmer. That was it. 10 seconds. But this tiny conversation taught me something important about real American English. First, Americans often talk about the weather. Not because they care deeply about temperature, but because it is a friendly way to start conversation. Second, the sentences were extremely simple. No complicated grammar. No advanced vocabulary. Just natural, everyday language. This realization helped me relax. Many English learners believe they must speak in long, perfect sentences. But small talk proves the opposite. Sometimes simple English is the most natural English. A few days later, I had my first real small talk conversation. I was walking toward the mailbox again. By now, that small metal box had become the center of my English practice. As I opened it, I heard footsteps behind me. It was the neighbor with the golden dog. He smiled and said, "Getting used to the neighborhood?" This time my brain processed the sentence quickly. "Yes," I answered. "It's very quiet here." He laughed softly. "Yeah, except when my dog starts barking." The dog wagged its tail as if it understood the conversation. Then he asked another simple question. "Where did you move from?" I answered slowly but clearly. "I came from another country. This is my first time living in the United States." His reaction was warm and curious. "Oh wow. Welcome. That must be a big change." And just like that, the conversation continued naturally for another minute. What made this moment special was not the complexity of the English. The words were simple. What mattered was the connection. Small talk creates connection. And connection makes conversation easier. Psychologists explain that when people feel socially connected, the brain releases chemicals like dopamine and oxytocin. These chemicals reduce anxiety and improve learning ability. In simple terms, friendly conversations help the brain learn language faster. That explains why small talk became one of my most effective English teachers. After that day, I started paying closer attention to the patterns of small talk. I noticed that many conversations follow a simple structure. A friendly greeting. A short comment about something around you. A quick response. Then goodbye. For example, "Nice weather today." "Yeah, finally sunny." "Have a good day." "You too." 4 sentences. Conversation finished. Understanding this pattern helped me participate more confidently. Another technique that helped me improve quickly was collecting useful small talk phrases. Every time I heard a natural sentence from a neighbor, I remembered it. For example, "Pretty nice day today." "Just getting some fresh air." "Busy week so far." These sentences became my small talk toolkit. Instead of translating from my native language, I could use real phrases that Americans use every day. Language experts call this chunk learning. Instead of memorizing individual words, learners remember complete phrases. This method helps speaking become faster and more natural. Soon I noticed something interesting. My neighbors started recognizing me more often. "Hey, good to see you again. How's the week going? Enjoying the sunshine?" Each small conversation felt easier than the last. And with each interaction, my confidence grew. One afternoon, something unexpected happened. I saw the lawn-watering neighbor again. The same one who first greeted me during my second day in the neighborhood. This time he was sitting on a small chair outside his house, drinking coffee. He waved as I walked past. "Hey! Want some coffee?" I hesitated for a second. Accepting the invitation meant something new. Not just small talk. A real conversation. But I remembered something important about learning English. Growth often begins just outside your comfort zone. So I smiled and said, "Sure. Thank you." That simple decision would soon lead to longer conversations, deeper connections, and unexpected changes in my life. Because sometimes small talk is only the beginning. Behind those short, friendly sentences, something bigger is waiting to happen. And for me, that bigger story was just starting. The cultural shock nobody told me. Many people believe the hardest part of learning English in the United States is vocabulary. Others think it is grammar. Some say pronunciation is the biggest challenge. But after living in America for a while, a different truth slowly becomes clear. The real challenge is not only language. It is culture. Language and culture move together like two dancers. When you understand one, the other suddenly becomes easier. But when culture feels unfamiliar, even simple English can become confusing. During my first month in the neighborhood, this realization appeared many times in small, surprising moments. One morning I stepped outside to take out the trash. The air felt cool, and the sky looked bright blue. Across the street, the same neighbor who once offered me coffee was walking toward his car. He looked up, smiled, and said, "Beautiful day, isn't it?" At first, I looked up at the sky again, almost like I needed to check if he was correct. Yes, it was a beautiful day. But something about the question confused me. Was he asking my opinion about the weather? Was this the beginning of a conversation? So I answered very carefully. "Yes, it is very beautiful today." He nodded and replied quickly. "Finally. Last week was freezing." Then he laughed a little and drove away. The whole conversation lasted maybe 15 seconds. But inside my mind, it felt like a small cultural lesson. In many countries, conversations often begin with practical topics. Work, family, plans, or important information. In the United States, conversations often begin with something simpler, the environment around you. The weather. The neighborhood. The weekend. These topics are safe, friendly, and easy for everyone. And this small discovery helped me understand something important about learning English in America. Sometimes the words are easy. The context is the real lesson. For example, when an American says, "Nice weather today," they are not giving a weather report. They are inviting a short conversation. And when someone says, "How's your day going?" they are not asking for a detailed story about your schedule. A simple answer like, pretty good, is usually perfect. Understanding these cultural patterns makes English feel less stressful. Instead of searching for complicated answers, you begin to follow the natural rhythm of everyday communication. Another surprising cultural moment happened one weekend afternoon. I was standing in front of my house trying to understand how to use a lawn mower. The machine looked simple, but I had never used one before. In many American neighborhoods, people take care of their own lawns. It is almost a small tradition. Grass must stay neat and green. As I examined the machine, my neighbor walked over with a friendly smile. First time with a mower? I laughed a little. Yes. I think so. He chuckled and pointed at the handle. Don't worry. It's easier than it looks. Then he spent the next 2 minutes explaining how to start it. What surprised me was not only the kindness. It was the communication style. His explanation was simple, clear, and relaxed. Instead of long technical sentences, he used short instructions. Pull this. Hold here. Push slowly. And suddenly, I realized something powerful. Real-life English often uses short action phrases. This type of language is extremely useful for learners because it is direct and practical. In fact, research in language acquisition shows that learning through real-life tasks improves memory. When the brain connects language with action, understanding becomes deeper and faster. So that small lawn mower lesson became another English class. After starting the mower successfully, my neighbor smiled and said, "See? You're officially part of the neighborhood now." We both laughed. Moments like this helped me see something important about American culture. Many interactions are casual but meaningful. Neighbors talk while walking dogs. People chat while taking out the trash. Short conversations happen naturally without planning. And each one becomes an opportunity for real English practice. Another cultural surprise appeared during my first neighborhood barbecue. One evening I smelled something delicious in the air. The neighbor across the street was grilling food outside. Soon a few other neighbors gathered in the yard. Someone laughed loudly. Someone else carried drinks. After a moment, the lawn mowing neighbor noticed me watching from my porch. He waved. "Hey! Come join us." At first I hesitated. In my culture, visiting someone's gathering without an invitation might feel strange. But here, the invitation was clear and friendly. So I walked over slowly. People introduced themselves with relaxed smiles. "Nice to meet you. Welcome to the neighborhood. Glad you came." The conversations were casual, sometimes funny, sometimes simple. And something interesting happened. Because everyone spoke naturally and informally, my listening skills improved faster. Instead of textbook English, I was hearing real American conversation. Short jokes. Friendly teasing. Relaxed storytelling. Language experts often say that immersion is one of the fastest ways to learn a language. Immersion does not always mean studying harder. Sometimes it simply means participating in daily life. That barbecue evening taught me new phrases, new expressions, and something even more valuable. Confidence. Because once you survive a conversation with several native speakers, smaller interactions feel much easier. As the evening ended and people began returning to their houses, my neighbor said something thoughtful. "You're doing great with your English, by the way." I smiled, a little surprised. "Really?" He nodded. "Yeah. The best way to learn is exactly what you're doing, talking to people." That sentence stayed with me for a long time. Because it confirmed what I was slowly discovering myself. Learning English in America is not only about studying language. It is about understanding people. And every conversation, no matter how small, helps break another invisible barrier. Little by little, those barriers were disappearing. But one particular neighbor would soon play an even bigger role in my journey. A role I never expected when I first checked that quiet mailbox on my second day in America. The neighbor who became my English teacher. Sometimes the best English teacher in America is not a teacher at all. No classroom. No textbooks. No grammar exercises. Just a neighbor, holding a cup of coffee and asking simple questions. During my first month in the neighborhood, many people were friendly. They smiled, greeted me, and sometimes talked for a few seconds. But one neighbor slowly became different from the others. He was the same person who helped me with the lawn mower and invited me to the small barbecue. His name was Mark. Mark had a calm voice and the relaxed confidence many Americans have. He spoke naturally, but not too fast. And most importantly, he seemed curious about my story. One morning I walked outside again to check the mailbox. By then, the mailbox had already become part of my daily English routine. Mark was sitting on a small chair near his driveway, drinking coffee and reading something on his phone. He looked up and smiled. "Morning. Getting used to American mornings yet?" I laughed softly. "I think so. But I'm still learning many things." He nodded. "Yeah, America can feel strange at first." Then he asked a question that changed the direction of our conversations. "So how are you practicing your English?" For a moment, I hesitated. The honest answer was simple. I mostly studied grammar before coming here. Mark leaned back in his chair and smiled knowingly. "Ah, grammar. That explains it." His tone wasn't judgmental. It sounded almost amused. Then he said something that stayed with me for years. "Grammar is useful, but conversations are where English actually lives." That sentence felt like a small light turning on inside my brain. He continued. "Tell you what. If you want real practice, just talk with me whenever you see me outside." I wasn't sure if he was serious. "You mean, practice English with you?" He nodded casually. "Sure. Neighbors helping neighbors." That moment became the beginning of something unexpected. Our conversations slowly became longer. Not formal lessons. Just normal talks about daily life. Sometimes we spoke for 5 minutes. Sometimes 10. And during those conversations, Mark unintentionally taught me several powerful strategies for learning English quickly in the United States. The first strategy was thinking in simple sentences. Many language learners try to translate complex ideas from their native language. That process slows the brain and creates confusion. Mark naturally encouraged simpler communication. For example, one day he asked, "What did you do this weekend?" My brain started building a complicated explanation about shopping, cooking, and organizing my apartment. But before I finished thinking, Mark said something interesting. "Just give me the short version." So I answered simply, "I went shopping and cleaned the house." He smiled. Perfect. That moment taught me an important lesson. Simple English is powerful English. You don't need long sentences to communicate clearly. Another helpful technique came from the way Mark asked questions. His questions were usually open but simple. How do you like the neighborhood? What surprised you about America? What food do you miss from home? These questions allowed natural conversations to develop without pressure. And they gave me opportunities to practice describing my experiences. Research in language learning shows that storytelling helps memory and fluency. When we describe personal experiences, the brain connects language with emotion and context. In other words, talking about real life helps language stick. One afternoon we sat outside while the sun was slowly setting behind the houses. Mark asked another thoughtful question. What was the hardest part about moving here? I paused for a moment before answering. Understanding fast English. He laughed gently. Yeah. Americans do talk fast. Then he gave me another useful tip. Instead of trying to understand every word, listen for the main idea. This advice changed the way I listened. Before that moment, I tried to catch every single word in conversations. When I missed one word, my brain panicked. But Mark explained something important. Even native speakers miss words sometimes. We just focus on the message. That idea helped my listening skills improve quickly. Instead of chasing individual words, I began listening for the overall meaning. Over time, conversations with Mark became something I looked forward to. They were relaxed, friendly, and full of practical English. Sometimes we talked about American culture. Sometimes about travel. Sometimes about completely ordinary things, like grocery shopping or weekend plans. And something interesting started happening. My confidence grew. Psychologists often explain confidence as a result of repeated positive experiences. Each successful conversation tells the brain, you can do this. And the more confident you feel, the more willing you are to speak. One day Mark joked about our daily talks. You know, you're improving pretty fast. I laughed. Because you're my teacher. He shook his head. Nope. I'm just your neighbor. But in many ways, he was both. A neighbor who helped me practice real English. A neighbor who turned everyday conversations into language lessons. And slowly, those lessons were breaking the invisible barrier between understanding English and truly living in it. But our conversations were about to change again. Because sometimes friendship grows quietly, without anyone noticing at first. And sometimes the people who help us learn a language also become part of a much deeper story. One that I never expected when I first arrived in that quiet American neighborhood. Coffee talks and real English practice. A strange thing happens when you stop treating English like a subject and start treating it like a conversation. Suddenly the pressure disappears. Words come easier. Mistakes feel less embarrassing. And sometimes the best English practice begins in the most ordinary place imaginable, a quiet driveway, 2 chairs, and a cup of coffee on a calm American morning. That is exactly where my English began to change. After a few weeks of small talks and mailbox conversations, Mark and I slowly created an unexpected routine. Most mornings, if the weather was good, he sat outside with coffee before starting his day. Sometimes he read news on his phone. Sometimes he simply watched the street wake up. And sometimes he waved when he saw me walking outside. Coffee? At first I always felt slightly nervous accepting the invitation. Not because of the coffee, but because longer conversations meant more English. But over time something surprising happened. Those conversations became the most natural English lessons I had ever experienced. No classroom. No pressure. Just life. One morning the air felt fresh and cool. The sun was rising slowly behind the houses, and the street was still quiet. Mark handed me a mug of coffee and asked casually, "So what's the biggest difference between here and your home country?" It was a simple question, but it opened a door to a real conversation. I thought for a moment before answering. People talk more with neighbors here. He nodded. Yeah, that's pretty common in many American neighborhoods. Then he asked another question. What surprised you the most when you arrived? I smiled. How fast people speak English. He laughed loudly. Fair point. That small exchange may sound simple, but it taught me something powerful about learning English in real life. Real conversations grow through questions. Mark's questions were not complicated. They were open, friendly, and connected to everyday life. And because they were about my experiences, answering them felt natural. Language learning research shows that personal topics help the brain remember vocabulary better. When we talk about our own lives, the brain creates emotional connections with the words. In other words, stories help language stick. So our coffee conversations slowly turned into storytelling practice. I talked about my first week in America. About the confusion in grocery stores. About trying to understand different accents. Sometimes my sentences were slow. Sometimes I paused to search for words. But Mark never rushed me. Instead, he listened patiently. And occasionally he helped by rephrasing my sentences in a natural way. For example, one day I said, Yesterday I go to supermarket and I buy many food. He nodded and replied gently. Oh nice, you went to the supermarket yesterday and bought a lot of food? Without directly correcting me, he simply repeated the sentence correctly. This technique is actually recommended by many language teachers. It is called natural correction. Instead of interrupting the conversation, the listener models the correct sentence naturally. This method helps learners improve grammar without losing confidence. Another useful habit developed during those coffee talks. Mark often asked follow-up questions. If I said I visited a store, he asked what I bought. If I mentioned a movie, he asked if I liked it. If I talked about the weather, he shared his opinion too. This created something important for language learning: conversation flow. Conversation flow means that ideas move naturally from one topic to another. And when conversations flow, speaking becomes easier. One day I asked Mark something that had been on my mind. Why do Americans talk about weather so much? He laughed. Because it's the safest topic in the world. Then he explained something interesting about American culture. Weather, sports, and weekend plans are common small talk topics because they are neutral. They help people connect without discussing sensitive issues. This cultural understanding helped my listening skills again. Now when someone said, "Looks like rain later," I knew it was not only about weather. It was often an invitation for friendly conversation. Another important strategy one learned during those coffee mornings was active listening. Instead of worrying about my next sentence, I started focusing on understanding Mark's ideas. When you truly listen, conversations feel more natural. You respond to meaning instead of translating word by word. And slowly, something unexpected happened. My brain stopped translating everything. Some sentences began appearing directly in English. This is a major milestone in language learning. It means the brain is building direct connections between ideas and the new language. And those connections were forming not from textbooks, but from daily conversations over coffee. One morning Mark said something that made me smile. "You know, you sound much more relaxed speaking English now." I thought about it for a moment. He was right. The fear I once felt during that first mailbox conversation had almost disappeared. Instead of worrying about mistakes, I focused on communication. And communication is the real purpose of language. Those simple coffee talks had quietly become my most powerful English practice. Because language grows fastest where there is comfort, curiosity, and human connection. But something else was also growing during those conversations. Something I had not expected. Friendship. And sometimes friendship changes the direction of a story in ways you cannot predict. Because one day, during one of those quiet coffee mornings, a new person walked into the conversation. A neighbor I had seen before, but never really spoken to. And that moment would slowly turn our ordinary English practice into something far more meaningful. When friendship slowly became love. Sometimes the most important person in your English journey appears when you are not even looking for them. Not in a classroom. not in a language school, but in a completely ordinary moment, during an ordinary conversation. That morning looked like many other mornings in the neighborhood. The sun had just climbed above the rooftops. The street was quiet except for distant birds and the soft sound of a car driving away somewhere far down the road. Mark and I were sitting outside again with coffee, talking about something simple, weekend plans, I think. Then someone walked toward us from the sidewalk. I had seen her before, but only from a distance. She lived 2 houses away. Sometimes she walked past in the morning carrying a small bag, probably heading to work. Sometimes she watered the plants in front of her house. But we had never spoken. Until that morning. Mark looked up and waved. "Hey, Emily." She smiled and walked over. Emily had a relaxed, friendly energy. The kind of person who makes conversations feel easy. Mark introduced us. "Emily, this is my neighbor I told you about. He just moved here recently." She turned toward me with a warm smile. "Nice to meet you." My brain quickly prepared the standard response. "Nice to meet you too." It was a small exchange, but something interesting happened. Emily spoke in a clear, natural way. Her voice was calm, and she didn't rush her words. Compared to some fast conversations I had heard before, understanding her English felt easier. She sat down for a moment while Mark poured another cup of coffee. "So how are you liking the neighborhood?" she asked. I thought carefully before answering. "It's very peaceful. Everyone is very friendly." She laughed softly. "Yeah, that's one thing I love about this area." Then she asked another question. "How long have you been in the United States?" "A few months," I said. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Oh wow, your English is already really good." I smiled politely, but inside I knew the truth. My English was still very much a work in progress. But conversations like this were helping it grow faster every day. Something interesting about American culture became clear during that conversation. People often encourage language learners. Even small progress receives positive feedback. And that encouragement can be extremely powerful. Psychologists explain that positive feedback activates motivation in the brain. When people feel supported, they become more willing to continue learning and speaking. That is exactly how I felt during conversations with Emily and Mark. The conversation that morning lasted only about 15 minutes. But it introduced something new into my English practice. A third voice. When 2 people talk, conversations are usually simple. But when 3 people talk, something interesting happens. The conversation becomes more dynamic. People interrupt politely. They add stories. They laugh and react naturally. This type of interaction is extremely valuable for language learners because it exposes the brain to different speaking styles. And Emily's speaking style was slightly different from Mark's. She used more expressive phrases. For example, when Mark joked about his dog barking every morning, she laughed and said, "Oh my gosh, that dog never stops." I noticed something immediately. American English often uses emotional expressions like, "Oh my gosh," "No way," "That's funny." These small phrases make conversations sound natural and lively. So I quietly began collecting them in my memory. Another helpful moment happened later that week. I was walking back from a nearby grocery store carrying a small bag of food. As I reached my driveway, Emily was outside watering her plants. She waved. "Hey! Grocery run?" I smiled. "Yes. I'm still learning where everything is in the store." She laughed. "Oh yeah, American grocery stores can be huge." Then she asked something simple. "What did you buy?" I lifted the bag slightly. "Just some vegetables and bread." She nodded approvingly. "Healthy choice." The conversation lasted maybe 1 minute. But these small interactions were building something important: comfort speaking English. Each conversation felt less stressful than the previous one. And the more relaxed I became, the easier English felt. Language experts often say that fluency grows when speaking becomes automatic instead of forced. Small daily conversations help create that automatic response. A few days later, something interesting happened during one of our morning coffee talks. Emily joined us again, and the conversation turned toward weekend activities. Mark asked casually, "So what's everyone doing this weekend?" Emily thought for a moment. "I might go hiking if the weather stays nice." Then she turned toward me. "Have you explored the parks around here yet?" I shook my head. "Not yet." She smiled. "You should. They're beautiful this time of year." Then she paused before adding something unexpected. "If you want, we could go together sometime." The invitation felt simple and friendly. But for me, it meant something bigger. Another chance to practice English. Another opportunity to experience American life more deeply. I agreed. That would be great. Looking back now, that moment seems small. Just a casual weekend idea between neighbors. But sometimes the most important stories begin quietly. A simple conversation. A shared walk. A friendly connection. At that point, I still believed my journey in the neighborhood was mainly about improving my English. What I didn't realize yet was that these conversations were slowly building something else. Friendship. And sometimes friendship grows into something much deeper. Something that crosses languages, cultures, and expectations. But that part of the story was still waiting around the corner. And it would begin during a simple walk through one of those nearby parks Emily had mentioned. Learning love across two cultures. Learning English becomes very different the moment emotions enter the conversation. Vocabulary suddenly feels more important. Tone matters more. Even simple sentences carry deeper meaning. Because when conversations move from small talk to real feelings, language is no longer just a tool for communication. It becomes a bridge between two worlds. That realization slowly appeared during the first walk Emily and I took together. The park she mentioned was only a short drive from the neighborhood. It was one of those peaceful American parks with wide walking paths, tall trees, and families enjoying the afternoon outdoors. Children were playing near a small playground. A couple walked their dog along the path. Someone nearby was flying a kite. Everything felt calm and relaxed. Emily walked beside me with an easy pace, pointing out small things along the way. "This park is really popular in the fall," she said. "The trees turn bright orange and red." I looked around, imagining the colors she described. "It must be beautiful." She smiled. "It is." Walking conversations feel very different from sitting conversations. The movement removes pressure. Silence does not feel awkward because both people are simply enjoying the environment. And for language learners, this type of conversation can be very helpful. When you walk and talk, your brain becomes more relaxed. Studies in cognitive science show that gentle physical movement can improve creativity and language processing. In simple words, walking sometimes makes speaking easier. That afternoon, the conversation moved naturally between small topics. We talked about food, about movies, about travel. Emily asked many questions about my home country. "What food do you miss the most? What holidays are important there? Is the weather very different?" Each question gave me a chance to describe my experiences in English. At first my sentences were still simple. But something interesting was happening. The more personal the topic became, the easier it felt to speak. Language learning research often explains this effect. When people talk about meaningful topics, the brain becomes more motivated to communicate. Emotional engagement improves language fluency. And culture was one of the most interesting topics between us. For example, Emily was curious about family traditions. "In my family," she said, "we usually have big dinners during holidays." I nodded. "In my culture, family dinners are very important too." Then she asked another thoughtful question. "Was it difficult moving so far away from your family?" The question surprised me slightly. But it also created a deeper moment in the conversation. "Yes," I admitted. "Sometimes it feels lonely." She nodded with understanding. "I can imagine." This kind of empathy is something that often appears in American conversations. People may speak casually, but they also appreciate honesty. Sharing small personal truths can create stronger connections. Another interesting difference appeared in the way we expressed emotions. In some cultures, feelings are communicated indirectly. But many Americans speak more openly about emotions. For example, when Emily enjoyed something, she said it clearly. "That movie was amazing." "That food is so good." "I love that park." Listening to these natural expressions helped me learn something important about emotional English. Instead of neutral descriptions, American conversations often include expressive adjectives. Amazing. Awesome. beautiful, interesting. These words add color to everyday language. During our walk, Emily pointed toward a small lake in the park. Let's sit there for a minute. We found a bench facing the water. Ducks moved slowly across the surface while the sun reflected softly in the distance. Then Emily asked a question that changed the direction of our conversation. What made you decide to move to the United States? I paused before answering. There were many reasons: work opportunities, curiosity, the desire to experience a different culture. But another reason had slowly become important. Learning English. I wanted to improve my English and experience life here, I said. She smiled gently. Well, you're definitely doing that. Then she added something encouraging. And honestly, your English sounds really natural when you talk about real experiences. That comment revealed something valuable. Many language learners sound more fluent when discussing familiar topics. Personal experiences require less translation because the ideas already exist clearly in the mind. So talking about real life becomes powerful speaking practice. The conversation continued as we walked back toward the park entrance. At one point Emily laughed and said, "You know, our cultures might be different, but we actually have a lot in common: marriage and the language of family." Many people believe they will finally feel confident speaking English when they reach a certain level of vocabulary. Maybe 5,000 words. Maybe 10,000. But life has a funny way of teaching language much faster than textbooks. Because one day, you might realize that the most powerful English lessons are not coming from grammar books or language apps. They are coming from something much closer to your heart. Family. By the time Emily and I had taken several walks together, something between us had quietly changed. Our conversations were no longer just friendly exchanges between neighbors. They had become part of our daily lives. We talked while walking through the park. We talked while cooking simple meals. Sometimes we talked while sitting outside on warm evenings, watching the sky slowly turn orange as the sun disappeared behind the houses. And with every conversation, something interesting happened. My English continued to improve, but it no longer felt like studying. It felt like living. One evening Emily invited me to dinner at her house. The invitation was simple and warm. "I'm making pasta tonight," she said. "You should come over." I accepted, slightly nervous but also excited. Cooking together became one of the most natural language environments I had experienced in the United States. The kitchen smelled of garlic and tomatoes. Soft music played in the background. Emily moved comfortably around the kitchen while explaining what she was doing. "Can you pass me that bowl? Could you cut these vegetables? Watch the stove for a minute." These short instructions were perfect examples of practical English. Real life uses many small action phrases. And when you connect language with physical activity, the brain remembers words much more easily. Researchers often call this context-based learning. When language appears inside a real situation, like cooking, driving, or shopping, it becomes easier to understand and remember. During dinner we talked about many things. Our favorite movies, travel plans, family traditions. At one point Emily asked something more personal. Have you ever imagined living in America long term? The question made me pause. When I first arrived, my plan was simple: improve my English and experience a different culture. But life had slowly become more complicated. Or maybe more meaningful. I didn't know what to expect when I arrived, I admitted. But now, it feels more like home. She smiled softly. I'm glad. Moments like that taught me something important about language. When conversations become emotional or meaningful, we begin using English in a deeper way. Not just to describe things, but to express thoughts and feelings. This stage of language learning is very powerful. It moves beyond vocabulary memorization and enters real communication. Over time Emily and I started spending more time together. Weekends included small adventures. Visiting local farmers markets. Exploring nearby hiking trails. Watching movies on quiet Friday nights. And every activity became another opportunity to hear and practice natural American English. At the farmer's market, I heard phrases like, "Fresh strawberries today. Try a sample. That's a good deal." While hiking, we talked about nature and the changing seasons. And during movies, Emily sometimes explained jokes or expressions that I didn't understand. Little by little, my listening comprehension improved. Language experts often explain that exposure to natural speech in different environments strengthens the brain's ability to recognize patterns. And Emily's presence made that exposure constant. One afternoon, during a quiet walk back from the park, Emily stopped for a moment. "I want to ask you something," she said. Her voice sounded slightly serious. "Sure," I replied. She looked at me thoughtfully before continuing. "Do you ever think about what our future might look like?" The question hung gently in the air between us. In that moment I realized something important. Our friendship had slowly grown into something deeper. Something neither of us had planned. But something that felt natural. "I do think about it," I answered honestly. And I think it could be something really good." Emily smiled, a mixture of warmth and quiet excitement. From that point forward, our relationship continued growing. Months later, our neighbors were no longer just witnesses to my English journey. They were witnesses to a new chapter of my life. Eventually, Emily and I decided to build a future together. Our small neighborhood gathering celebrated the news. Mark joked loudly. "See? I told you this neighborhood was life-changing." Everyone laughed. Looking back, it was amazing to realize how everything began. A simple greeting. A mailbox conversation. A few cups of coffee. And slowly, those moments led to friendship, connection, and eventually marriage. But something even more interesting was waiting ahead. Because once two people from different cultures build a family together, a new kind of language learning begins. A language shaped by daily life, shared experiences, and the voices of future children. And that next chapter would teach me lessons about English, and about life, that I never expected when I first stepped into that quiet American neighborhood. Raising kids between two worlds. A fascinating thing happens when children grow up between two cultures. They do not worry about grammar rules. They do not memorize vocabulary lists. They simply listen, imitate, and speak. And before anyone realizes it, they are switching between languages as naturally as breathing. Watching that process closely can teach adults something surprising about learning English. Because sometimes the fastest language learners in the world are the smallest people in the room. Several years after Emily and I first met in that quiet neighborhood, life looked very different. The small house that once felt silent now felt full of movement and laughter. Toys appeared in unexpected places. Tiny shoes waited near the front door. And soft voices filled the rooms every morning. We had children. Suddenly the home where I once practiced English through short neighbor conversations became something else entirely. A bilingual family environment. From the very beginning, Emily and I talked about how we wanted to raise our children. Our backgrounds were different, but our goal was the same. We wanted them to understand both cultures. And language was the key. Inside the house, English was the main language because we were living in the United States. Schools, neighbors, and daily life all used English. But I also spoke to the children about my own culture, telling stories about traditions, food, and family memories. Something interesting happened during those early years. Children absorb language without effort. When our first child began speaking, the process looked almost magical. No grammar lessons. No vocabulary exercises. Just listening and repeating. Daddy, look. Mommy, come here. Doggy outside. Short sentences. Clear pronunciation. Pure curiosity. Watching this reminded me of an important truth about language learning. Children learn quickly because they are not afraid to make mistakes. Adults, on the other hand, often hesitate before speaking. We analyze every sentence, searching for the perfect grammar. But children simply try. And that courage to try creates faster progress. In many ways, our home became a living English classroom again. But this time, the teacher was everyday life. Breakfast conversations practiced simple daily phrases. Do you want milk? Eat your cereal. Time for school. Driving to the park introduced another set of vocabulary. Seatbelt. Traffic light. Turn left. Language appeared naturally in every activity. And that natural repetition strengthened listening and speaking skills. Linguists often explain that frequent exposure to common phrases helps the brain build automatic responses. This is why daily routines are powerful language learning environments. Another interesting discovery appeared during story time. Every evening Emily read books to the children before bed. Simple stories with colorful pictures and clear sentences. Sometimes I listened quietly beside them. Children's books are actually one of the best tools for English learners. The language is simple, the rhythm is clear, and the vocabulary often repeats. For example, one favorite story included sentences like, "The bear is sleepy. The bear goes home. The bear sleeps." The repetition helped children understand meaning easily. But it also helped me notice patterns in natural English sentence structure. Even after years in America, those small observations continued improving my fluency. Another surprising benefit of raising children in the United States was the connection with other families. Playgrounds, schools, and birthday parties created many new conversations with other parents. At first those interactions felt similar to my early neighbor conversations. Friendly greetings. Short exchanges. Small talk about weather or school activities. But now I felt far more confident. English was no longer something I practiced carefully. It had become part of everyday life. One afternoon at a playground, another parent asked me a familiar question. "How long have you lived here?" I smiled, remembering the many times I had answered that question in the past. "Several years now," I said. He nodded. "Your English is really good." That compliment made me reflect for a moment. My progress had not come from one dramatic breakthrough. It came from thousands of small conversations. Neighbors greeting each other. Coffee talks in the driveway. Walks in the park. Family dinners. Bedtime stories. Each moment added another piece to the puzzle. Language experts often describe fluency as the result of consistent exposure and meaningful communication. In other words, the brain learns best when language is connected to real experiences. Looking around the playground that afternoon, I realized something important. The nervous person who once struggled to answer, "How's it going?" beside the mailbox had changed. The barriers that once felt so large had quietly disappeared. Not because I studied harder, but because I lived the language. And now, as I watched my children run across the grass laughing with their friends, I understood something even deeper. Language is not just a tool for speaking. It is a bridge connecting cultures, families, and generations. But there was still one final realization waiting for me. A realization about the real secret behind learning English faster in America. A secret hidden inside the journey that began with my American neighbors, and grew into an entire life. And that realization would become the final lesson of this story. The secret behind real English. There is a moment in every long journey when you suddenly look back and realize how far you have come. Not because someone told you. Not because you passed a test. But because something that once felt difficult, now feels completely natural. Speaking English in America eventually became that kind of moment for me. And the surprising part is this: the real breakthrough did not come from studying harder. It came from understanding one simple truth about how language actually works in everyday life. Years after I first arrived in the United States, I sometimes found myself laughing about the early days. Back then, even small conversations made me nervous. A neighbor asking, "How's your day going?" could feel like a complicated exam question. But now those same conversations flowed easily. In the grocery store. At school meetings for the kids. During neighborhood barbecues. English had quietly become part of my daily rhythm. One evening I was sitting on the front porch with Mark, the same neighbor who had first welcomed me to the neighborhood years earlier. The sun was slowly setting behind the houses, and the air felt warm and calm. Mark handed me a cold drink and smiled. "You remember when you first moved here?" he asked. I laughed. Of course. I barely understood half the things people said. He nodded. "Yeah, but look at you now." That sentence stayed in my mind for a long time. Because the truth was simple. I had not followed some secret language formula. Instead, I had slowly built my English through real-life interaction. That is one of the biggest lessons people often misunderstand about learning English in the United States. Many learners think they need perfect grammar before they start speaking. But the opposite is often true. Speaking imperfect English in real situations actually accelerates learning. Scientists who study language acquisition explain that the brain adapts through repeated exposure and interaction. Every time we hear natural speech, our brain recognizes patterns. Every time we respond, even imperfectly, the brain strengthens those patterns. This process is sometimes called active language immersion. And it works far better than passive memorization. One clear example appeared during school events for my children. Parents gathered in the gymnasium for meetings, performances, and community activities. At first I mostly listened. Parents talked about homework, sports teams, school lunches, and weekend plans. But after attending these events regularly, something interesting happened. I started recognizing common phrases automatically. "Did you see the game last night? The kids grow up so fast. We should plan a playdate sometime." These sentences appeared again and again in different conversations. The repetition created familiarity. Eventually my brain stopped translating every word. Instead, I began understanding the meaning instantly. Language researchers often explain that fluency grows when comprehension becomes automatic. This happens when the brain processes language in chunks, not individual words. And real-life conversations are full of these chunks. Another important discovery came from something very simple. Listening more carefully. Many American conversations include small sounds that textbooks rarely explain. Words like, yeah, right, or got it. These are called back-channel signals in communication science. They show that someone is listening and understanding. Learning to use them naturally can dramatically improve conversations. For example, during a chat with neighbors, I might say, "Yeah, that makes sense." "Oh right, I heard about that." "Got it." These small responses keep conversations flowing smoothly. And they help build connection with other speakers. Another powerful strategy appeared during daily routines. Driving. In the United States, many people spend a lot of time in their cars. Instead of listening only to music, I sometimes listened to podcasts or talk radio. At first it felt challenging. Native speakers talked quickly, and some expressions were unfamiliar. But over time, listening regularly improved my comprehension. The brain adapts when it hears natural rhythm and pronunciation repeatedly. Even if we do not understand everything at first, exposure gradually increases recognition. This is one reason many language experts recommend extensive listening. Simply hearing English frequently can accelerate learning. But the most important lesson of all came from something much simpler than techniques or strategies. Connection. Language grows fastest when it is connected to real people. Neighbors greeting each other. Friends sharing stories. Families eating dinner together. Those moments create emotional meaning. And the brain remembers meaningful experiences far better than isolated vocabulary lists. Looking back, the real secret behind my English journey was never just about language. It was about community. The neighbors who welcomed me. The conversations that slowly became easier. The family life that grew around those everyday moments. Each experience removed another small barrier. Until eventually the barriers disappeared completely. But there is one final reflection I want to share. Because the journey that began with a simple hello beside a mailbox eventually revealed something deeper about learning English, and about life itself. And that final lesson might be the most important one of all. Breaking barriers, one conversation at a time. Some barriers in life look enormous from a distance. Language barriers feel exactly like that. They appear like a wall standing between you and the life you want. New friends. Better opportunities. Deeper connections. When I first arrived in the United States, English felt like that wall. Every conversation seemed risky. Every sentence felt uncertain. But something surprising happened over the years. The wall did not fall all at once. It slowly disappeared, brick by brick, conversation by conversation. Looking back now, the journey feels almost unbelievable. The person who once stood quietly beside the mailbox, unsure how to answer a simple greeting, eventually built an entire life in that neighborhood. A life filled with conversations. Family dinners. Children's laughter. Friendly chats across front lawns. Late evening talks on the porch. All of those moments were made possible by one thing, language slowly becoming part of everyday living. When people ask how I improved my English in the United States, they sometimes expect a complicated answer. Maybe a special learning system. Maybe an advanced study method. But the truth is much simpler. English improved because I stopped treating it like a school subject. Instead, it became part of my life. One of the biggest turning points happened when I realized something important. Fluency does not come from knowing every word. Fluency comes from comfort with communication. That means speaking even when the sentence is not perfect. Listening even when some words are unfamiliar. Responding naturally instead of searching for perfect grammar. Language experts often explain that communication confidence activates faster learning in the brain. When we relax and participate in conversation, the brain absorbs patterns more easily. Fear, on the other hand, blocks that process. And many English learners carry unnecessary fear. Fear of mistakes. Fear of misunderstanding. Fear of embarrassment. But everyday life in America taught me something encouraging. Most people are not judging your grammar. They are simply happy to connect. I saw this again and again in small interactions. A cashier asking about my day. A neighbor waving from across the street. A parent chatting during a school pickup. None of those conversations required perfect English. They only required willingness to speak. And each conversation built a little more confidence. Over time, something interesting happened inside my mind. English stopped feeling like a second language. It started feeling like another voice I could use naturally. Not perfectly. Not academically. But comfortably. Another powerful realization appeared when I watched my children growing up. For them, language was never a barrier. They spoke English with friends at school. They spoke about family traditions at home. They moved between cultural worlds easily. Watching them reminded me of a beautiful truth. Language is meant to connect people, not separate them. And once you begin using it that way, learning becomes easier and more enjoyable. Even now, after many years, I still notice new expressions or cultural habits in American communication. Language continues evolving. But that is part of the joy. Because learning never really stops. It simply becomes part of daily curiosity. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I walk past the same mailbox where my first neighbor conversation happened. The neighborhood looks familiar now. The trees have grown taller. The children who once played on the sidewalks have grown older. Life continues moving forward. And every time I see that mailbox, I remember the small moment that started everything. A simple greeting. How's it going? At the time, it felt like a difficult question. Today it feels like a symbol. A reminder that big life changes often begin with very small conversations. For anyone learning English today, especially those dreaming about life in the United States, I want to share one final idea. Do not wait until your English feels perfect. Start speaking while it is still imperfect. Listen even when you cannot understand every word. Join conversations even if they feel a little uncomfortable. Because those small steps slowly break down the barrier. One sentence at a time. One conversation at a time. And one day you might suddenly realize something beautiful. The language that once felt impossible has quietly become part of your life story. A story filled with neighbors, friendships, family, and experiences you could never have imagined at the beginning. All because you kept showing up. All because you kept speaking. And all because you allowed English to become more than a subject, but a bridge to the world around you. That quiet American neighborhood gave me far more than language skills. It gave me connection, confidence, and a deeper understanding of how powerful communication can be. And sometimes the greatest breakthroughs in life begin with something very small. A smile. A greeting. A neighbor saying hello. If this story felt familiar, it is probably because learning English is never just about grammar. It is about courage, patience, and the quiet moments when you choose to speak even if your voice is unsure. My journey with my American neighbors began with simple greetings, small conversations, and a lot of mistakes. But those tiny moments slowly turned into confidence, friendships, and a life I never expected to build in the United States. And here is the surprising truth: real English is not learned in silence. It is learned in real life. Through neighbors, families, daily routines, and the small conversations that slowly break every barrier. If this real English story practice helped you relax, listen, and learn naturally, then this channel was made for you. Every new video will bring another slow, clear English story, designed to help you improve English listening, speaking, and real-life communication step by step. So before you leave, take one small action that could change your English journey. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who is also learning real-life English. And in the comments, tell me one simple thing. What is the first English sentence you want to say confidently in real life? Your answer might become the inspiration for our next story. Because sometimes the next conversation you start might open a completely new chapter of your life. See you in the next real English story practice.